Okay, here we go. Chapter 19 in our book. Everybody needs to sit quiet, have your listening ears on, have your talking mouths turned off, and listen as I read. The next vision came while Jax was having breakfast the following morning. It was so unexpected that he drew in a sharp breath and inhaled a mouthful of raisin bran. His father rushed over and began pounding him on the back. Mr. Opus took his son's face in his hands and pierced anxiously into his eyes, until he remembered and glanced quickly away. Even with Jax choking, he couldn't risk placing himself in the line of fire of the old family talent. "You okay?" he tossed over his shoulder. Jax nodded, wiping soggy cereal off his chin. "Fine." The clock on the stove read 7:33 a.m. Who could be watching his video now? "Dad," he asked, "did your parents ever video themselves?" Mr. Opus shook his head. "I'm not sure, but I doubt it. They were pretty elderly by the time home video came along." "Yeah, but is it possible that they used it to hypnotize people?" Mr. Opus was horrified. "That works?" Jax backed off. It was bad enough that his dad was afraid to look at his own son in the face. The last thing he wanted was for his poor father to suspect every newscaster and talking head on TV. It happened again during a social studies test in third period. There were Jack's eyes, where his essay answer on West Virginia coal exploration was supposed to be. He waited for the vision to dissipate, but instead of fading out, it grew stronger until he could clearly see his irises darkening from royal blue to indigo. This was no fleeting impression. This kind of pip image only came during a serious and sustained mesmeric link. When was it going to stop? "Dude," Tommy whispered from the next seat, "you look like you need to change your underwear." So Jax's distress was obvious to others as well, only he didn't feel particularly distressed. Annoyed maybe, concerned, and jealous. Yes, envy, the kind that kept you up nights and ate at your stomach lining. But who was he jealous of? Tommy? The other students who were able to write their tests without interference? All at once he knew. It wasn't his envy. This emotion was coming through to him via the mesmeric link. The jealousy belonged to the person watching the video. If there had been any doubt in Jax's mind that his clip was bending people, this blew it all away. And now it seemed that these remote hypnotisms could be every bit as powerful as the face-to-face kind. At lunch, he called Cynthia, but Dr. Mako was still unavailable. "How many people were watching that clip I recorded?" he demanded of Mrs. Samuels. "It can't just be at the Institute. I got blowback while I was eating breakfast at 7:30. "Let's not jump to conclusions until you've had a chance to speak to Dr. Mako," the assistant director suggested. "And when's that going to be?" Jax complained bitterly. "I just experienced a link as strong as anything I've ever felt in the Institute." But Dr. Mako was not at Cynthia that day or all that week. The visions continued. The pip image was becoming so clearly defined that Jax could make out the pores in his own skin. He was bombarded with emotions that had him jumping for joy one minute and close to tears the next. In math one day, he picked up a fit of giggles so uncontrollable that he was sent to explain himself to the principal. "What exactly was so funny?" Mr. Orentine demanded. "I honestly don't know," Jax replied. "I might have been the first time in the history of school that this stock answer was 100% true." It was as he left the office, stepping carefully, his eyesight still impaired, that the cause of his laughter came to him. He didn't see it. The pip before him was still his own two eyes. Yes, he knew it. The way one can conjure an image in your imagination. It was a Psy one, stepping into a crowded room, dressed from head to toe in a fluffy white bunny suit. Nothing had ever been more hilarious. Correction, thought Jax. Nothing has ever been more hilarious to the person thinking this. This was a mesmeric link with Sing too, but why was he watching Jack's video? By now the visions had become so frequent that Jax no longer bothered to report them to Miss Samuels. He picked up the flavor of intense competitiveness along with an image of a tennis court that might have come from Grace. but he didn't dare confront her until Dr. Mako made an official announcement that the threshold of remote hypnotism had been crossed. He had to keep a lid on this. On Saturday, he arrived at Cynthia to the news that Dr. Mako was not there, and no, he wasn't expected any time that day. For Jax, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, his frustration reminding him of his very first week there, filling out endless tests while no one would even tell him what the Institute was about. Only when he threatened to quit had Dr. Mako suddenly found an opening in his schedule for the Opus family. Okay, maybe he'd try something similar now. Okay, I'm going home, he told Miss Samuels. Call me when Dr. Mako's ready to discuss what's been happening to me. Jax, that's really not being a team player, the assistant director warned. Jax tried to explain himself. Nothing I could learn here today is half as important as what I have to tell Dr. Mako. Even if I stayed, I'd be useless to you. The elevator closed in front of him. He was on the subway hurtling downtown when another vision hit abruptly. The picture was the same. The close-up of his eyes had become as familiar as the network logo in the corner of a TV monitor. But the emotion that came with it was brand new and shocking in its intensity. Hatred. Jax held on the pole he had been leaning against. The clip's short, he told himself. It'll pass. The pip solidified into high definition, cutting off his view of his real surroundings. The strength of it and its speed in revving up to full power told him that this was going to be the most intense wave of blowback yet. He didn't hear the word. It was more like it appeared to his mind. Dopus. He should have known. Who else hated Jax this much? Who else was capable of so much pure corrosive acid? Wilson. The impressions followed in a parade, a slideshow of intimidation. At the corner of 45th and 3rd, 2 a.m., Wilson's voice. We'll meet at the corner of 45th and 3rd. Jack's mind reeled. Wilson couldn't be planning a rendezvous while watching the video, so why were these words bubbling out of his thoughts? Jack sensed urgency and excitement mixed with a touch of fear. Whatever this was to Wilson, it was daring and super important. 2 a.m. tonight. Get this right, and everyone can forget all about Jackson Opus. Me? Jax blurted out. The vision dissipated, leaving him the object of curious stares from his fellow passengers. He glanced quickly away, only to notice that the train was pulling into the Borough Hall station. He was in Brooklyn. Not only had he missed his stop, but also several others in a long tunnel into the next borough. Wilson's words came back to him. Get this right, and everyone can forget all about Jackson Opus. What was that supposed to mean? A plan, obviously. Some sort of conspiracy to hurt Jax. But what? At 2 in the morning? He would be fast asleep in a dormant building with his parents in the next room. How could he be in danger? Had Wilson figured out a way to reach him hypnotically? Through the blowback, maybe? Nobody was supposed to know about that. But Jax had been screaming it at Miss Samuels for the better part of a week, so it wasn't inconceivable that the news had gotten out. How was he vulnerable? He had no idea. None of this was supposed to be possible in the first place, so logical reasoning could only take you so far. According to Dr. Mako, there was no such thing as a remote hypnotism, which meant there should be no such thing as blowback. But that didn't change the fact that both were happening. Gathering his wits and his book bag, Jax raced out the double doors and crossed over the opposite platform to catch the next Manhattan-bound train home. His thoughts continued to whirl. How seriously should he take Wilson's words? Who had he been talking to? Jax had no way of knowing whether he'd overheard an actual conversation or nothing more than the wishful thinking of a rotten jerk. Yet he was absolutely convinced that the threat was very real. There was something about Wilson's malevolence, the fierceness of his ill will, that told Jax this was no false alarm. He had to find out, but how? Stay tuned, and tomorrow you can hear Chapter 20.